Hello everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Altengrad city from City Skylines. We are going to continue working around the old city walls today. Last time we only did some places in front of the walls, so today we will move inside. I'm going to build an old barracks together with finishing the actual wall, and of course we will continue filling some of the blocks further in the downtown. So let's go. So we are going to start by positioning some of the buildings that I would like to use for the old barracks. Now, these kinds of buildings that I'm going to position here are going to be very old, and they are not exactly going to be in use today because, like I mentioned in the last episode, we are mostly building the city fortifications as they probably were built over many decades, maybe even centuries actually, and were never really properly finished, and the city was just very difficult to defend anyway, even with the walls. So all kinds of these military structures around the city were built because it felt necessary to build some sort of fortifications, but the city was just too large, too undefendable anyway. So most of these military structures in this time period especially are no longer used by the military. Maybe some of them are even used by some civilians or as some warehouses, for example, or offices or whatever. But most of the military buildings, the old barracks and all these kinds of maybe even tunnels inside these walls or something are just abandoned and simply not used. So that's going to be the theme, the main theme around these barracks structures that I'm going to be doing here to make it look like it's mostly abandoned. Only maybe a couple of these buildings, maybe a couple of rooms in these buildings are just rented by the city for, like I said, some civilian use as maybe warehouses or offices or something like that. So I'm mostly using these buildings that came together in the same pack with the walls. So this is the Citadel buildings, and I'm also using some of the different buildings around this place, buildings that usually look very old and kind of fitting for this area. Okay, so when the city expanded in the around the half of the 19th century, there was also the railroad being built, and they had to cut into the walls. So that's pretty much where the wall is ending right now, and that's where all the new blocks were just popping up. But there was probably some sort of extensive demolitions in this place, especially with the barracks. Maybe the barracks were partially destroyed, and as you can see, there is the embankment for the railroad. So I'm imagining that probably the barracks used to be bigger, or maybe there was some just different really old structures where the embankment for the railroad right now is. So they had to just demolish that. And we have been doing that in the previous episode as well. We have been doing some building blocks where the old walls used to be. We have also built the neo-Gothic church, again, probably in the way of the walls, or where the walls just used to be, and some of the places just turned into a park. Some of the blocks I just did not fill with buildings. Now, in today's episode, like I mentioned, we are also going to not only focus on the main focus of the episode, so that's the barracks and the walls, but we are also going to fill some of these blocks with buildings. So, just like with the previous episode, I'm mostly skipping through it because you all saw this in pretty much every episode of Altengrad. So, I'm filling quite a large portion of this downtown area, actually, because there have been a couple of blocks unfinished, really. It's the blocks really close to the downtown, so I really wanted to have them high density and kind of modern. And I'm not sure if it's going to be visible in the cinematics, but unintentionally I did manage to create a very distinctive difference between these blocks that are in the downtown and the blocks that would be probably behind the city walls, or actually in front of them, outside of the former city walls. So that's very good that happened. Maybe it's going to be visible in the cinematics that the buildings are just a tiny bit different, the overall style. Maybe you can actually see it right there, that the church and the line of parks kind of are dividing the style between the different buildings. So, like I said, unintentionally did that, but it turned out looking quite good. Now, there's going to be one more episode after this one where we are going to be concentrating mostly on the downtown. If you remember, back when I was building the square in front of the train station, I guess, with the market buildings and all that, I left some places open, completely unfilled in the old town. So that's something that we will have to take a look at in the next episode. And today I was just preparing some roads. You could have seen me build this like a pedestrian road. It's not in this shot because I just got rid of it, but rebuild it later. And on the side of that street, there's probably going to be some more modern buildings. And I suppose that in the next episode we are going to more concentrate on that tram street that's going towards the Barracks area, because that's probably going to be a street that changed quite a lot in the recent years. So we are just going to be working mostly around that next time. Now, after the episode that's going to be next week, I suppose that we are going to start... Maybe I'm actually going to advance to the 30s already. I'm not sure if I'm going to make the cinematic episode before that. Probably not, because like I even answered to some of your comments, I don't really want to do the 30s change in the timeline to do any changes to the actual existing parts of the city that we already built. I'm mostly going to just advance to the 30s so I can justify using some more modern architecture. And I have quite a lot of buildings that I would really like to put somewhere closer to the downtown, maybe right next to the main train stations or, something like that. I don't really want to put them all in the suburbs or something. So I would really like to do the switch, as fast as I can. And I think I might actually do it after we finish this part of the downtown, really, because it's going to be just more office buildings then and more modern residential quarters and all that. So that's definitely something to look forward to, right? I'm probably going to take a look at the big park that we built, because all around it there's probably going to be some more modern architecture. So that should be interesting, right? Just a tiny little note about what's coming. Anyway, we are now continuing still working on this area. So what's exactly happening over here? I really wanted to create some sort of end to this embankment for the railroad, so I just used these procedural objects walls, and I was using these slope networks, as you can see. I'm not really making it look like it's going to be looking, as great as it can be with just the slopes. It's obviously going to work together with some trees and bushes and just decoration intended to cover some of these inconsistencies with the surfaces, because of course I can only place the grass slopes, and there's going to be some of those cliffs just popping through, so I really need to hide all those edges. Now in here I really wanted to build some sort of a block of buildings that's not exactly going to look very good, because maybe this was a bigger block, but it was partially demolished because of the construction of the railroad. So I'm trying to put some slightly older buildings and not so great looking buildings compared to the buildings on the other side of the street in these blocks, so that, like I said, it might look like it was partially demolished because of the railroad construction. I also put that retaining wall network right there, and later I'm just going to detail it so it's going to look like a proper retaining wall. Now, in the future, maybe in the quite near future, actually, maybe we are going to see some changes to this railroad. Maybe I'm going to add more tracks. Maybe this entire block of buildings might be demolished in time, but I'm not really sure about that just yet, where I'm going to take this series, like how many changes to the downtown I'm actually going to make. It's probably safe to say that we are going to see a lot of changes to the barracks area, because like I said, even in this time period in the 20s, it's probably mostly abandoned. So there will definitely be some attempts in the future, probably in the 80s or 90s maybe, to just completely rework this place, maybe make it into some sort of a modern residential area. I was thinking that we can do maybe some kind of a walk path, or maybe like a bicycle path on top of the old city walls in here, because the walls are most probably going to change as they are, because, why not? If the city didn't decide to demolish them at to this point in time, then they are probably not going to demolish them even in the future. So all the parts of the wall that were really in the way of the city expansion probably got demolished right when the city decided that the walls are no longer needed, and all the rest of the walls that remained are probably going to remain even into the future, because they are kind of not in the way anymore. The city just figured out how to build around them, okay? So doing just some of these details around this side entrance to the citadel, or to the bastion there, and then we are going to do some detailing inside the barracks. So it's mostly going to be just that empty spot in front of the barracks, because that's probably where the soldiers would just gather or whatever. And I'm definitely going to make sure that the place is going to look abandoned. So later you can see me that I'm going to put some details on there, especially some stains, so the entire place is just going to look worn. And I'm also going to use, and this is exactly the reason why I do like using, I'm not sure if it's called right, the sprites or whatever, the tiny little grass that is appearing on the grass texture, like the actual grass, like the 3D grass, because I can then use it to maybe make it pop up through some of these surfaces, which is definitely going to be very useful, especially in this place. At first I wanted to put some decals as cobblestones on that empty area in the barracks, but that has a very big disadvantage, because I can't then put any other decals on top of it, so stains and all that, and it would look very clean. So I'm just going to use the ploppable concrete in there, which obviously has the texture for the cobblestone, and then later I'm just going to put all kinds of decals on top of it, and I'm going to use the surface painter to make some of the tiny little patches of grass just popping through the cobblestone, which is actually going to look very good. You're gonna see that all in the cinematics. And of course, this is one very important technique that is very critical to some of this detailing, and that is just using Move It to move the decals up and down, so that you are not exactly going to see the full colors of the decal, but you are going to see it slightly transparent, I suppose, which is just going to tone it down a bit. So it's going to be very subtle, just a difference, very subtle stain on the surface. It's very useful for stains that are very, very bright otherwise. And this is exactly what I was talking about, doing these tiny little patches of grass just popping through this place, and it's definitely adding a very nice feel to this area that is just abandoned and no longer in use, right? And like I mentioned before, maybe in time we are going to see some reworks of this area. Maybe they are going to decide that this place is just going to be kept as it is. Only the buildings are going to be repurposed, and all the empty areas are just going to be refurbished. But I'm thinking that it's probably going to be both, that we are going to see some destruction of some of these old barracks buildings, and the ones that are going to remain all the way to the modern times are probably just going to be repurposed for some museums, I suppose, galleries. That's usually what happens with these kinds of buildings, all right? Now, we are just going to do a last touch of these blocks, which means that in here I just decided to put some parks, because I didn't really want to fill every single block with buildings in here. And as you can see with that shot, it actually created a very nice feel to this place, that the blocks of buildings more towards the river are kind of separated on all sides with some parks, or with just some trees. And that really improved the overall feel, that maybe that part of the city, that tiny district with the blocks of buildings, was just some recent project, and maybe those buildings just appeared very recently. All right, so guys, that's where we are going to end for today's episode. Thank you for watching it. I hope you liked it. If you did, then you can put a thumbs up underneath the video, share the video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. And you can also become the channel member if you want to directly support it. So take care and goodbye.